Good morning, Nikki.
Good morning, Kelly.
Welcome, everyone, back to the Addiction Nutritionist podcast. I believe this is episode number 3. We are going to be taking a deep dive on a very important topic today, which is protein. I have been doing this work for roughly 5 years, and if anyone has been counting how many times the word protein came out of my mouth, and I got, $1 for, I'd be a billionaire for sure. I mean, this is the number one thing I talk about over and over and over again. And there is a lot of misinformation out there. There's a little bit of controversy around protein in terms of like, what are the best sources? How much do individuals need? I think it's so important for people in recovery to know that there is a specific amount of protein that you need, especially in early recovery. And so I can't wait to answer some of those questions today. This is going to be really not technical, but highly educational. I'm going to be talking a lot. And so I'm hoping that Nikki will interrupt me with some really good questions so that I can take a breath and reset my thoughts and make sure that we're getting you the most value for this next hour that you're going to spend with us. We don't want to get too super sciencey because we know that most people are not into that, but we also don't want to be too general because everybody they need to eat protein for one reason or another. So I want to swing it all around and just be super specific as to why this is so impactful in recovery. And it's not just about optimizing health. It's about how you walk into every day, how you show up in your life, how you feel from one minute to the next. Protein's going to impact that. But before we do that, we are going to share our food sponsor today.
Wonderful. Kelly, who is the food sponsor?
It is salmon. Salmon.
Love it.
Right? Because I was like, we need to pick a protein, but we should pick a really good lean protein that's got other added benefits. And salmon is the rock star of that. So let's talk about salmon. I just want to share too, that one of the reasons I love salmon is because one of the coolest things that ever happened to me was watching the salmon run in Victoria, Canada. I'm not well traveled, but that was a trip I took many, many years ago. And we didn't even know, we were just driving up the coast of Victoria, pulled over because we were like, what's going on over here? And there was a river and we actually saw the salmon run, which was one of the most impactful moments of my life in terms of witnessing something extremely cool. It was the coolest thing I've ever seen. So that was really awesome. So why salmon? Well, it is a lean protein. It's got a lot of added benefits, but the number one added benefit, and we're going to talk about this a little bit more in detail, is that it's got some really important essential fatty acids. Most people will tell you that salmon is kind of a brain food. It's considered an oily, cold water fish. The interesting thing about salmon is that they're born in freshwater, but then they navigate to the ocean, right? And then have this ingrained intelligence where they actually go back to their birthplace to spawn and have all their babies. And it's just really incredible. So they're born in freshwater, but they spend a lot of time navigating fresh ocean water. Our salmon in the US is primarily coming from Atlantic salmon or Pacific salmon. There's only one type of Atlantic salmon, but there are 5 different types of Pacific salmon. And you've probably heard of them. It's Chinook, sockeye, coho, and then there's pink and chum. Those 5 different species, the Chinook and the sockeye tend to be the fattier versions. So we eat those a lot, right? That's what we're buying from the store. Sockeye salmon tends to be a smaller type of salmon. Some of these other ones can grow much larger, but sockeye smaller. Chinook, sockeye, and coho tend to be what you find most when you buy a little salmon steak or salmon fillet. It's probably one of those 3 species that you're eating. The pink salmon is primarily used for canned food, canned salmon, and the chum is really more of a processed, highly processed version of salmon that's thrown into processed foods. Probably when you're buying I don't even know, right? Imitation fish or something, how you can, yeah, I don't even know what that stuff's made of, but I've heard it's made of different parts of fish. I thought this was interesting too. I guess if you go to a fancy restaurant, and I'm from the Northeast, so you guys might be picking up on some of my Yankee words that come out every now and then. But if you're in a restaurant in the Northeast and you're like, I'll have the Norwegian salmon, that pretty much just means it's still Atlantic salmon, but it's farmed in Norway. So can't say I've had it. Not sure why I'd want it. Like, why would I want salmon that was like right here off the coast, but then it got shipped to Norway and was farmed in Norway and shipped back? Seems like a lot of traveling for a piece of salmon. So I don't know, maybe there's benefits to that. You can always write me and tell me if that's something that, floats your boat.
Well, Kelly, I'm wondering if the water could be cleaner there.
Maybe. Could be something to look into. Most of us in America are eating salmon that's coming from like Alaska, the Pacific Northwest, and Canada, and then sometimes Norway and Greenland. Salmon can range from pink, red to orange. I'm sure you probably know that if you've ever seen it in the store. Smoked salmon, still a very popular way to have it. Salmon is a really good lean protein, but it also has a lot of potassium, selenium, and B12. We know those are really important nutrients for different reasons. We always talk about potassium in relationship to helping to lower blood pressure. Selenium is really important for your thyroid. B12, everyone knows B12 is like super important for energy production. But salmon specifically has been found in studies to be heart protective, Alzheimer's protective. It has been studied for its qualities for enhancing memory specifically. There are numerous cancers that it's been linked to preventing or playing a role in preventing cancer, I should say. And it can reduce inflammation for things like RA, rheumatoid arthritis. The highlight or the rock star of salmon, though, is the omega-3 fatty acid content. We talk about omega-3 fatty acids on this podcast quite a bit because it is one of the few nutrients that has been studied in relationship to alcohol and drug cravings, and it has been proven to reduce cravings for drugs and alcohol. I also read recently that there was another study where it reduced cravings specifically for opiates. So that's important to know, I think. There are omega-3 fatty acids, but also omega-6 fatty acids. We need both of those, but I don't know how much you know about this, Nikki, but like so many people will tell you need the full spectrum, and that is true, but a lot of people don't realize it's actually the ratio between those two that is the most important. So if you have some omega-3s and an abundance, like way more of omega-6s, that actually creates an inflammatory profile. It creates inflammation in the body. You always want to have more omega-3s than omega-6s. And why are we talking about this? Because there is a significant difference between wild caught salmon and farm raised salmon. So wild salmon tends to be about 20% higher in protein content and about 20% lower in fat content. And some people will say, they'll look at the actual numbers of omega-3 and be like, well, the farm raised salmon actually has higher amounts of omega-3. And so you might, if that's all you heard, you might be like, well, it might be better to have the farm raised. But what they're not telling you is that ratio is completely imbalanced. The omega-6s is much higher. So you might get less omega-3s in the salmon, but the ratio is better. And ultimately that's what you're looking for, if that makes sense. I found out some interesting stuff about farm raised salmon that wasn't fun to know, but it's, I guess, better to know. And I don't know how much of this is like proven or still going on. One of the things is there are salmon farmers who are trying to get a law passed to allow them to add growth hormones to the salmon because they want to be able to grow those salmon much faster. It actually cutting off a whole year of raising those salmon and getting much larger fish. So that would fall under technically, I believe, genetically modified salmon if they're being fed those growth hormones. There's also, I've known this for a long time, they give the farm raised salmon pellets so that their flesh looks similar to the wild salmon, that you get that really rich pink orangey color. The problem is there's a couple different versions of the coloring that's going into these pellets. Some of them kind of natural, some of them synthetic. And one of the versions that they're using is apparently the same version that was put into pills that humans consumed as a self-tanner, and to actually like change the color of your skin to make it look like you had a natural tan. But the problem is that they found it was causing retinal damage, retinal as in being part of the eye. And so they had to stop that, but they're still using that stuff in the farmed raised salmon. So it's debatable, right? Like, is that safe for us? Is it safe in very small amounts? Maybe. What if you're eating a ton of farm raised salmon all the time and that's building up in your system? I don't know. So, that was a little concerning. I'll tell you, I think the most important part here is that the cleanest salmon has been found to be wild Alaskan salmon. And the reason is it's because that water is more clean. They have the lowest amount of heavy metals and pesticides. So wild salmon from Alaska, out of all of those versions, supposedly tends to be the best. So, and I say these things, I don't ever want to come off like hoity-toity, right? Like there's a lot of food insecurity out there. There's a lot of middle America that's really struggling to put food on the table right now. So I don't want you to walk away thinking like, well, Kelly said you have to have Alaskan, organic, this and that. You always just do the best that you can. But I think it's all about informed consent. I think maybe that's the best term to put on this. Like, just know what you're putting in your body, do the best you can. Maybe you buy the really good stuff sometimes and you buy the cheaper stuff other times, and you always kind of work in the direction of improving your food quality. But there's no shame in it. We don't even have any proof that it's like necessarily for sure damaging your health. It's just stuff to be like cautious about, to know about, right? How do you feel about salmon now?
I mean, I love salmon. And I'm not one of those people that likes fishy fish, even though a lot of people say salmon is fishy. Mm-hmm. I have a hard time with the little fish, anchovies and sardines and stuff. Mm-hmm. I wish I loved them more. So I make sure that I eat plenty of salmon since I don't eat those. Mm-hmm. I have a little issue with it when it stinks up my house when I cook it. So mm-hmm. I've had to kind of like navigate that. Mm-hmm. I've found that poaching it helps. Mm-hmm. If you poach it, just mm-hmm. cook it in like broth. And also if I broil it rather than cook it stovetop, that helps. Yeah. I love the skin. I love the crispy skin. I prefer to try and get the wild Alaskan as much as I can. I think I've learned through osmosis a lot of the stuff that you've shared here. I also wanted to bring up the fact too with farm raised salmon. It's a lot of the same problems as farm raised cattle. You got like the hormone problem that you just shared, and then also the antibiotics that they have to put in the food or the water or whatever because of the conditions that all those fish are swimming around in. So just one other little add on to that. And I fully am with you. Like, we just have to do the best we can cost wise, because it can be super pricey sometimes, but I'm a big fan. Can I tell you a really cool story real quick about salmon? Because kind of to go with your cool salmon nature story with like the spawning and stuff. Mm-hmm. I wasn't there, but I did see a video. My best friend went to Alaska with her husband and his sons, and it was like season, like it was salmon season for the bears, and the bears were just, they could literally just reach in the water and pick up a salmon, and they could it was just so easy. And it was so easy, in fact, that the bears were picking up a salmon and then they'd kill it, like smash its head against a rock or whatever they did. I'm sorry if that's graphic for some of you. But then the salmon would stomp, or the bear would stomp on the salmon and squish out the eggs and just eat the caviar. What? It was a big caviar party for the bears.
I didn't know they did that.
And then they just threw the fish. Like, so, like the eagles and the wolves and whatever had all this fish.
Oh my gosh.
But the bears were just going after the caviar, and you could even hear it.
Bougie bears.
I heard it. They're bougie bears.
Bougie bears. They're like, I want the good stuff.
Isn't that amazing?
That's hysterical. Oh my gosh. I'm glad you shared that story. The best salmon that I ever had was actually on the Middle Fork of the Salmon River in Idaho. I talked about this in another podcast. I went on a life-changing rafting trip, a 6-day rafting trip there. And on one of the days that we had grilled salmon, and I think it had some like cilantro lime marinade on it, but that's when I realized how much I love salmon on the grill the best, because you got this really crunchy outside texture, and the salmon did not taste fishy at all. I have had salmon on many occasions that tastes really fishy, and it's not like a preferred taste for me, but this salmon I think was super fresh, and just the way they had it marinated, yeah, and cooked on the grill, I guess reduced some of it. It was amazing. I'll like, when you just have one of those meals and you're like, I'll never forget it. It's one of those meals for me. So.
Oh, I love that. That's
Yeah.
inspiring. I'm not a griller. That's something I need to learn how to do.
Yeah. My husband's a chef, so I leave the grilling to him.
Awesome.
Yeah. Okay, guys, let's get into the protein conversation. We're going to take a deep dive. The agenda for today is what is protein and why do we need it? But specifically, why is it so important in recovery? We're going to spend a lot of time talking about that. What are the best sources and forms of protein? Kind of a hotly debated topic. Are all proteins created equal? Maybe, maybe not. How much do you need in general? How much do you need as an individual? And then kind of talking about portion sizes a little bit. So I hope that you'll walk away from this conversation feeling way more confident in why we should be eating protein every day, not just every day, but kind of like all day. So what is protein and why do we need it? Protein is literally made up of, you are going to hear me say this over and over again. It is made up of these single molecules called amino acids. Amino acids. There is a whole episode on amino acid therapy where we talk about using these molecules in supplement form in early recovery, really important. But this one, we're going to talk just about the food-based amino acids. This group of molecules, amino acids, are literally the building blocks of life. There's over 20 of them. You will find over 500 of them in nature, but only about 20 of them in the human body. 9 of the 20 are considered essential, meaning you got to get them from your diet and you got to get them every day. Even if you miss out on some of them at different meal times, that's probably okay. But really consistently through the day, you need a combination of getting these 9 all day in your different meals. There are 2 very important essential amino acids. One is called phenylalanine and one is called tryptophan. We're going to circle back to that conversation later. The other 11 are considered non-essential. That is such a tricky term because it makes you think like non-essential, not important, don't need them. And that's not really the case. 8 of those non-essential are considered conditionally essential, which means that they're still important and you still need them, but they are dependent upon the essential amino acids. Like your body has different ways of making these amino acids that fall into that non-essential category, but the conditionally essential ones rely heavily on all of those other aminos. And there's 2 important ones there. One is glutamine and one is tyrosine. Again, we'll circle back to that. But our body takes these amino acids and reconfigures them in thousands of different combinations to grow a piece of hair, to turn over a skin cell, to turn over a liver cell, to turn over a cell in the GI tract. So your body's mostly made of protein. And so all these different amino acids go into something called the amino acid pool. Your body knows how to grab the ones that it needs to construct these different parts of the body. And we end up having over thousands of different combinations. Now, serotonin is a very important neurotransmitter that has a close relationship with our mood. It has a close relationship with whether or not we are full of fear or fully content, if we're living our best life, if we are not dealing with depression. Serotonin is the happy hormone. It's made from one single molecule, and that's tryptophan, which is one of those 9 essential amino acids. Dopamine is the spark of life. That's the neurotransmitter that gives us our self-confidence, motivation, ambition, drive, concentration, pretty much everything that makes us feel alive. And dopamine is also made from one single molecule, and that's tyrosine, which is one of the conditionally essential ones, but the precursor to it is the phenylalanine, which is one of the 9 essential. So why am I saying that? Well, because Phenylalanine and tryptophan, as part of those 9 essential amino acids, are what make your serotonin and dopamine. And there's no controversy whatsoever about whether or not those are essential. So you have to be getting those every day to have the ingredients to making your serotonin and dopamine. We're going to kind of go take a deeper dive into the recovery aspect and those neurotransmitters in a minute, but I want to kind of just I want to keep going on why these amino acids and protein are so important. I'll also share that, serotonin, dopamine made from one single amino. We have endorphins, which is another important neurotransmitter. That one is made from long chains of amino acids, somewhere between 4 and 40 different aminos. A strand of hair, for instance, is 18 amino acids long. 95% of your serotonin is made in your gut, by the way, and the other 5% is made in your brainstem. And the way that the serotonin gets from the gut into the brainstem is by traveling through the vagus nerve. The longest known amino acid structure in our body is called a titin isoform. It's part of your muscle structure. It's 34,000 amino acids long. Just to give you that understanding of the range, right? So serotonin, single molecule. This titin isoform, part of your muscle, 34,000 molecules long. So that's a really wide range of proteins in the body, right? When we take little amino acids and stack them up in short little chains, those are known as peptides. So you might, if you're like in the health and wellness world, or you hear somebody talking about peptides, that's what that means. It's just a short little chain of aminos. Protein is used for structure of the body, like I was telling you, new cells, hair, nails, that sort of thing. But there's pretty much 5 different things that the body uses protein for. So the first one is structure. It's also enzymes. It's used to make hormones. It's used to control fluid balance in the body. Proteins are circulated in the blood and help to keep water evenly distributed throughout the blood cells. And it's also really important for making certain antibodies. Antibodies are proteins that seek and destroy invaders in the system, right? So I like to use the example of wound healing to give people kind of an idea, because if you've ever had like an elderly person in your life or whatever, and they get a wound, or maybe they're, in ill health, that watching how their wounds heal is an important thing, right? You always want to make sure people's wounds are healing well. Wounds don't just heal, they need certain ingredients to do that. Protein is one of the main ingredients to wound healing. It also takes a certain amount of fluid, vitamin A, vitamin C, and zinc. But that's something we can see happen. We get a wound on the outside of our hand. If you're an older person, your skin is super thin. My skin is always already super thin on my hands. And if I get a wound there, it might bleed really quickly. But I do kind of watch that, right? Because I want to see how many days is it going to take for that scab to kind of appear and then the skin to kind of come back to normal. That's something you can see. Your body's using the protein that you eat. If you go to the doctor and you have trouble with wound healing, he'll tell you, make sure you're getting enough protein because you need that to repair the skin cells and heal that wound. But that's something we can really see. We can't see how our body's making serotonin. But I think using the wound healing example kind of gives you an idea of like what's going on the inside. If you're trying to produce serotonin, same process. You need protein, and you need those very specific amino acids and nutrients to make serotonin. You cannot pull serotonin down from the sky. It's not hanging around in the clouds. You have to manufacture it in your body from the foods that you eat. You'll probably hear me say that many times, but I think it's important that people understand that it literally comes from the protein that you're eating. The next important thing, let me say this too. Our body is in a constant state of breaking down and rebuilding. So we're turning our cells over all the time, just like, watching your body heal a wound could take 3 days, could take 3 weeks, but there's a constant breaking down and a constant building up. I was doing some research because there's a lot of different cell types in the body, and they all sort of have an internal mechanism for how quickly they turn over. So we know that like the lining of the gut, those cells can turn over in like 1 to 3 days, less than 5 days. Those cells can turn over really fast. But you can have heart,
That's awesome, because so many people, that's where they're so messed up. So that's
Mhm.
like, I think that gives me hope for a lot of people who I know that's where a lot of their issues lie. I'm happy to hear that.
Yeah, if you can find out what's going on with your gut, and get on the right protocol, you can heal it pretty quickly, right? But then like we have cells inside of our heart that could be there for up to 40 years. We have cells inside of our islands that can be there our entire lives. Um, the liver, you'll often hear people talk about how amazing the regenerative properties of the liver are. Those cells are turning over like every 10 to 16 months. But like if you lose a piece of your liver, that whole piece, by cells like replicating and duplicating can completely regenerate in like 6 to 8 weeks. And they say your liver is never older than 3 years. Like you always have a 3-year-old liver. Because if you think about the time span of how these cells are constantly turning over, all those cells will have turned over in the last 3 years. So your liver's always a little baby, a little 3-year-old, a toddler, 3-year-old toddler. I think that's really cool.
That's amazing.
Yeah, the heart thing was kind of interesting because it said, like, if you're under the age of 25, less than 1% of your heart cells turn over. And then if you're over 25, that drops by 50%. So it's like half of 1% that your heart cells turn over. That's one of the areas of your body where, and if you do have a heart attack, they say that the damaged part of the heart will actually not repair. It just turns into scar tissue. So it is. And I believe heart disease is the number one killer of women, by the way. We know it's a big problem for men, but I believe it's the number one heart killer of women. So protecting your heart, super important, because it cannot heal itself the way that the liver can. But when, this leads us to, like you were saying, you have a lot of friends with digestive issues. That is a chronic thing, right? And when you eat protein, if your digestive system is not in order, that's kind of like the buck can stop there. You may not be fully breaking down those proteins. You may not fully access those really important amino acids you need to build the structures of your body, to rebuild your neurotransmitters. So optimizing digestion, huge part of the PAWS protocol, huge part of the healing journey for anybody that's struggling with mental health issues, dealing with, symptoms of PAWS, post-acute withdrawal syndrome. And coming up in episode 8, we take a deep dive into digestion with a digestion expert named Karis. So I would refer you to that episode for learning a lot more about how to optimize that process. We could talk forever about all the chemicals that are involved, enzymes that are involved in helping to break down protein specifically, and what that process looks like. Really got to have sufficient stomach acid. When your body breaks down these amino acids, they go into something called the amino acid pool. I mentioned that already. The reason that's important is because we cannot store amino acids the same way that we can carbohydrates in fat. This amino acid pool, it's not like a physical pool. That's just kind of the word that they use in physiology and anatomy to describe the way the body uses amino acids. In that pool are amino acids you just ate from eating proteins, but also when your body's turning over, it's proteins turning over these cells. Up to 250 grams of body protein get turned over every day. And those do get recycled and go into that pool too. But this is important for people to know, because if somebody tells you like, oh, you don't have to eat that much protein because your body stores it, your body doesn't really store it for longer than 4 hours. That pool where those amino acids are going, the amino acids you ate, the amino acids from turning over your cells, it's just hanging around for like 3 to 5 hours, waiting for the body to use it up. And if it doesn't get used, the body gets rid of it. I heard a really great analogy from Biolayne. Some people love him, maybe some people not so much, but I think he's a really great resource. He's on a lot of different podcasts and that sort of thing. His name is Layne Norton. He's got a PhD. But he says that, let me find the quote. He says that protein storage is like saying that a house is a storage vessel for wood. So he said, if you're comparing a person's body in storing protein, it's similar to a house being a storage place for wood. You wouldn't go into a home and be like, oh, I need some wood, and start like breaking down your walls and extracting it from the structure, right? You don't want to be pulling wood out of the frame of the house. It's the same with your body's proteins. If you've got protein in your cells, in your muscle tissue, for instance, you want to preserve that as much as possible. So say you go a couple days without eating anything, you know that your body can't store protein more than 3 to 5 hours. You do not want your body going into your muscle tissue, and God forbid other types of muscle or other types of tissues, to be scavenging for those amino acids that it needs. Have you ever been sick and super happy? Can you ever, like, when you
only when I was loaded up with medication? Back in when I used to take like, like NyQuil and Dayquil and stuff like that, then you feel pretty good even though you're sick, but that's not a kind of I want to feel.
Right. But most people don't get the flu or COVID or a cold or whatever and feel like they're on top of the world. How they're feeling can kind of mimic depression a little bit, right? You feel really down, really foggy. You don't have any motivation to do anything. They call that sickness behavior. It's the way for the body to kind of keep you away from other people, because you might be, giving them something, and to keep you down in your bed, resting. And depression has a lot of overlapping symptoms with that. But I'm just saying, if you think about, people aren't typically eating a ton when they're sick. Depending on what you have, you might be having some chicken soup, or you might just be like, oh, I'm not hungry, I don't want to eat anything. And so you are putting yourself in a place where you're probably not getting enough protein that you need, not only to make antibodies, but to make your neurotransmitters, right? So you probably, don't have enough serotonin or dopamine during those times of sickness. Just kind of like a little metaphor, right?
Yeah. Can I interrupt real quick and ask you something?
Please do.
That Layne Norton analogy is a great one.
Mm-hmm.
And it reminds me a little bit, and tell me if this is a correct association. I know certain individuals, like especially like one example is women with eating disorders, and say they've been anorexic or they've deprived themselves of nutrition. And one of the first things to go often is their menstrual cycle. And I'm just wondering, is that the idea of kind of like the body's not getting what it needs, so it's taking from the body, from within the body, protein from non-essential systems?
Mm-hmm.
Could that be a comparable association or metaphor?
Yeah, I'm not an expert on that, but I would say that because we know protein is used to manufacture hormones, that could be one of the reasons why. But the other thing I would say is that the body is really, really protective of not putting women out into the world to reproduce when they are sick and not well and cannot create healthy offspring. So the body will do all sorts of crazy things to prevent the woman from reproducing if her body is not in a good state. So a lot of women find that they can't get pregnant, and there are many different reasons for that, but one of them can just be high stress, because a high stress female is not in the healthiest place to have a child, so those systems shut down, retracting the period, and even maybe not, you're not ovulating. These are all ways that the body is protecting the survival of the species. So yeah, there's like so many different ways that could be playing out, right?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. Here's the other thing, right? Let's talk about people in recovery. When you're in active addiction, if you ask people, and they've done this, like we have all kinds of, data about how people answer these questions and how these things have been tracked. When you're talking to people and they're in active addiction, they're typically not eating enough protein. They are typically being drawn to more carbohydrates and more fat, for a couple different reasons. Those foods are cheap. They give us quick energy, and they certainly have a much higher palatability, right? Like they tend to have a more enhanced taste. So people are very drawn to foods that are carbs, fat, a mixture of carbs and fat, that sort of thing. The body can store carbs and fat. This was kind of the point I sort of missed there when we were talking about how the body can't store protein. Body can't really store protein. The body can store carbs and fat. Fat, it's an infinite amount. You can store as much fat as you want. There's whole TV shows about that. Right. But carbohydrates, we can store them. We have a limited capacity. We store about 500 grams between our muscle tissue and our liver, because we always have a backup source of carbohydrates in our liver in the form of glycogen. If you could potentially tap out of all of that in an entire day of fasting, by the way, but you can store it. So yeah, protein, you can't store it. But I think it's important to note that we have data that says people are typically protein deficient. There are also a lot of people that will say protein deficiency is incredibly rare, because they're looking at it from this like really clinical, obvious perspective, where we've got these poor children in these other countries where you see the extended bellies, where they're actually extremely protein deficient. And like, those are extreme cases, but you can be totally malnourished from protein and not be seeing like the clinical signs of that. It may just manifest in low moods, right? Yeah. Exactly. Which people rationalize that all the time. Like, oh, they're feeling down because of X, Y, and Z, but what if it really is just a lack of protein, I was going through some studies, and I'm so sarcastic sometimes, but I was reading this quote from this one study. I'm going to read it to you. And it was like, when patients dependent on heroin or opiates are given a combination of amino acids, namely phenylalanine, which we know creates dopamine, tryptophan, which we know creates serotonin, that's me talking, tyrosine, again, that's dopamine, and then glutamine, which we know helps to repair the gut and balances blood sugar. And then, quote, it says, while undergoing detoxification, they show a significant reduction in cravings for opiates. This might be an important tool in the treatment of drug use that warrants additional study. When I read that, I'm like, yeah, we know. We're trying to scream it from the rooftops. Like, we have so many studies that end with that, like, this could be useful. We need some more studies. And we're like, yes, please give us the studies, because for those of us that are on the front lines, that are actually working with people in recovery and have experienced this ourselves, and we see it every freaking day, when we're like, hey, have you thought about increasing your protein? Let's bump that up a little bit and see what happens. And they come back a couple days later and they're like, I feel like a completely different person. Or they say, like, I definitely feel different. I've noticed a shift. My mood is a little better. I feel a little more grounded. Like, all of these things that we know that protein does. So I'm encouraged when I read that in studies. I'm also like, how can we get this on the front page of the newspaper? Because we're dying for it. I mean, some of us literally, right? We're dying for this information to hit the mainstream, to hit the treatment industry. Okay, I'm getting on a soapbox. I'll step down, but
it's so worthy, though. It's so worthy. I support your soapbox.
Yeah. So we talked a little bit about neurotransmitters. I want to circle back and really talk about, okay, why is this important in recovery? I just kind of want to say it again. Amino acids, which come from protein, are the building blocks for our neurotransmitters. Neurotransmitters, we have over 100 of them. They are neurochemicals, but there are 4 that have anything and everything to do with our mood. We refer to them as the mood regulating neurotransmitters: serotonin, dopamine, GABA, and the endorphins. Serotonin, like we were saying earlier, is made from tryptophan, single molecule that comes from protein. It is our happy hormone. It allows us to laugh at jokes. It wards off depression. It allows us to be in social settings. People that have low serotonin will experience, a lot of social anxiety. So that's why it's so easy to grab for a little drinky drink, right? To kind of get, oil the serotonin from being produced for a little bit, to try to get you, to ease into those situations. Dopamine, the spark of life. Actually, I want to say a couple things more about serotonin. Serotonin has links to things like OCD. It has links to things like anorexia and bulimia. It has a lot of links to things like intense fear and phobias specifically. So serotonin is really multifunctional. It plays a role in our gut. It helps to move, feces through the GI tract too. So it has not just mood related functions, but a lot of GI related functions too. Dopamine, spark of life. Made from phenylalanine, which turns into tyrosine. Those are two single amino acids like we were talking about that you get from protein. Dopamine is what makes you feel alive. It helps you to get out of bed in the morning. It helps you to have self-confidence. It helps you to, make your little to-do list and just tick, tick, tick those things off the list. You know what I mean? And one dopamine producing task leads to another. That's why you'll hear that famous speech from the guy from years ago who gave a speech at a college that said, like, make your bed, like there is a lot to that. When you make your bed in the morning, you get a little boost of dopamine, and those tasks, one, after the other, lead to more and more dopamine. So doing little things like that's really helpful. But again, if you're not eating enough protein, you may not be accessing these amino acids to make your neurotransmitters. And I want to say something really important here too. Your mood's important, but it's not as important as, say, physical damage to the body somewhere. So if you're kind of low on protein, your body's going to prioritize those amino acids to fix the structures of your body, to repair any damage that may be taking place. You're going through a chronic illness, you're going through a period of chronic stress, your body's going to prioritize those proteins. It does not see dopamine production as a priority over those things. So if your body's in an intense repair state, it's going to only use what's left to make your dopamine. That's why I would say it's really more important to have an abundance of dopamine producing molecules in your diet so that you have enough to spread it all out, right? And then if you have extra, you just pee it out. But you want to be filling up that pool every 3 to 5 hours.
I wanted you to say the word pool. It took me back to that amino acid pool idea. So like when you are in, I just remember when I was in my most broken down state, like all systems broken, all the lights going off, and just kind of reflecting that, you saying that, if anybody has any education or beliefs about that has, like amounts and, I don't know, restricting their protein intake or whatever, at that time, you could be so keeping yourself from just healing potential and feeling good potential, and I think a lot of people might be resistant, like I'm sure you probably work with maybe vegetarians or people who are just, I don't want to eat that much meat, all of the concerns, and I get it. But like for a period of time, have a giant pool. It's so that your physical body can be repaired and you can get the mood boost. So it's not, like that just makes so much sense to have a giant pool for repair. It's your big repair pool.
Totally.
That's just, I've never heard you say that before. I love it.
Yeah. I love that. I mean, if you literally close your eyes and you envision like an in-ground pool and all your little amino acid molecules are hanging around in that pool. And when you get out of bed in the morning, you walk over to that pool with your little coffee cup and you take a big old scoop, right, of amino acids. And you're like, well, there's my serotonin for the day. You need to have 4 cups lined up. All right, I'm gonna do another big cup, get my dopamine molecules, my endorphin molecules, and my GABA molecules, and then you go into your day with a full cup. And then hopefully 3 to 5 hours later, you bring your little cuppies over to the pool and you scoop them in there again. And there's plenty of amino acids, right? Like we're so oversimplifying this, and maybe it's a little kooky, but I think visualizing these things is really important because it can help you wake up every day and go, what can I do right now to fill up my cups? I need to fill up my serotonin cup because this day is surely going to make me tip out some of that, right? Somebody's going to tell me a joke and I'm going to spill a little bit of that serotonin out. Somebody's going to give me some bad news and I'm going to spill a little bit of those endorphins, which give me emotional resilience out. And I don't want to be sitting here with completely empty cups by the end of the night, right? I want to feel good all day. So yes, what a good sidetrack. So yeah, dopamine, spark of life, self-confidence, drive, ambition, motivation, just feeling like you have the ability, right? And then I'll also mention that when you're low in dopamine, that can be like a really apathetic type depression, not so much a low serotonin type depression, which is like irritated, agitated. Low dopamine depression is like, I'm not getting out of bed. What for? Just flat, apathetic, don't care, right? Really can't seem to dig deep and find that motivation. Endorphins, I mentioned this earlier, but those, one of the primary endorphins that we use, I think it's the beta endorphin. That one's 31 amino acids long. So it is a little bit different from serotonin and dopamine in that way. Endorphins give us pain relief, emotional pain relief, and physical pain relief. So if we get into a car accident and we break our leg, our body's going to flood us with endorphins to help us cope with the intensity of that pain. If we go through a breakup, we lose a loved one, our body's going to flood us with endorphins to help us cope with that pain. If you have ever had to be the person who made arrangements, funeral arrangements for somebody you loved that passed away, you will often hear people say the same exact thing. I don't know what's wrong with me. I haven't been able to cry. I think I'm still in shock. Your body's being propped up by endorphins in that first week. And then when you cognitively are aware that the funeral is over and you go back to your normal life, the endorphins go, we did our job. We're now going to retract. And that's when you become flooded with the emotions, right? It's a very biochemical thing happening in the background. So really important to remember that your brain actually doesn't know if you're in emotional pain or you're in physical pain. They can both feel just utterly awful. And our endorphins really give us that emotional resilience. Like, all day long, I have a stressful job, stuff's coming at me all day long. In order for me to just keep rolling with the punches and not be totally drained by that, I need to have a lot of endorphins present. And then GABA. GABA is also made from a single molecule, a single amino acid called glutamate. GABA is our anti-anxiety hormone. That's our neurotransmitter that helps us to feel calm and relaxed. If we have enough GABA and our GABA cup is full, we can just feel very settled in our body, very tethered, not too overwhelmed. We're just calm. One of the great examples of not having enough GABA is when you quit nicotine. If you've ever quit nicotine before, GABA hits the floor. You have very little GABA left. And that is where the intense irritability comes from. Your nicotine receptors in your brain are screaming. You don't have any GABA to cope. It takes a while for that GABA to start coming back and reproducing again, and you finding other ways to make it. Because a lot of people do find, although nicotine is very stimulating, it gives us some GABA as well. People will tell you that's where the stress relief comes from, right? This is why we use substances, these chemicals. This is why we use drugs and alcohol. We're like, maybe we've been depressed our whole life. And then we take a drink of alcohol and we're like, is this what normal feels like? Right. And all it's doing for you is it's giving you a flood of these chemicals that maybe you are genetically potentially low in, or maybe you grew up in a household that didn't understand nutrition or couldn't provide for you in that way. And you ate a very, very poor diet growing up and you just didn't have the molecules you needed to create enough serotonin. So maybe there's a little genetics, maybe it was poor diet, maybe there's other things like inflammation and poor digestion can totally hinder your body from making enough serotonin and for it getting into the brain. So there's a lot of different reasons why this could be, but if you're naturally low on serotonin and you drink alcohol and you get a flood of serotonin, that of course you want to keep doing that, right? Of course. And you may be led to believe that that's the only way. And you may develop an addiction because you now become dependent on that substance to keep giving you more and more serotonin. But that's really how tolerance builds. If you're drinking, the body goes, oh my gosh, every time she puts alcohol in this body, we have to like release all of our serotonin. It's like opening the floodgates. So we've got to hold on to our serotonin really tight. So when you did watch that funny movie with your friends last night, it wasn't as funny as it could have been because we weren't going to let you have any of the serotonin. We're sitting here just waiting because we know you're about to drink and we knew we got to release all of our serotonin in response to that. And so now all these other situations where you're not drinking and you're not releasing serotonin, so you're drinking more and more, that's how tolerance builds. The body starts to shut down those receptors as a way to combat the release of serotonin. And yeah, and that's ultimately,
Kelly,
yeah.
I think you need to, and it's very clear that you need to make a movie similar to the one that exists, the Pixar movie, or when, it's one of those. I don't remember the name, but it goes into the brain of somebody and it has like happy and sad and all the whatever. You just do such a good job of being those little molecules and like being the little moods and representing them very well. And I like it a lot.
That's
Just
funny.
want to say it's voiced now into the universe.
All right, we're looking for movie deals, folks. Send us your contacts. But yeah, I know what movie you're talking about, and it's funny when you have this knowledge and you watch that because you see it in a totally different way. You just want to be like, eat some protein.
Totally, 100%. That's why you need to have yours up against that. You know what I mean?
I know.
It's like, just like see that and then see this too.
Yeah, how funny.
Mhm.
Yeah, so we need to eat protein to rebuild our neurotransmitters. I just wanted to make sure this is clear. There's been a lot of news in the last year about the serotonin imbalance theory of antidepressants and how that's supposedly been debunked. The way that a lot of people are interpreting that is, oh, it's not serotonin. It's not serotonin that makes us feel better. And that's actually just a really, really simplistic way to look at it. What they're saying is that's not the only thing. Like I was saying earlier, there are so many ways that your body can, halt the production of serotonin. So, and like I said, inflammation will literally incinerate it. It won't allow it to get into the brain. If you're not consuming enough carbohydrates, carbohydrates are like the little bus that tryptophan takes to get across the blood-brain barrier into the brain to turn into serotonin. So if you don't have enough carbohydrates present in your diet to get across the blood-brain barrier to shuttle it across, it's not going to end up in your brain. And just so you know, antidepressants do not give you more molecules of serotonin. All they do is make the serotonin you already have present in your body work harder. So it will make the serotonin molecules hang out longer in the synapse, which is the space in between your brain cells where serotonin is active. So it just forces it to hang out there longer. And, a lot of people take antidepressants and say it didn't work for me, or I tried them for years and I didn't really get much effect. I would never necessarily advocate for people to take medications, but if you think about it from the perspective of, was your diet really poor too? Were you maybe not getting enough protein? Did you have other things going on that was preventing you from producing enough serotonin? Because if you don't even have enough serotonin to, you're working with less molecules in the synapse, that could be why the antidepressant wasn't working. Sometimes it's just another nutrient deficiency like folate. You need folate present to make more serotonin, to make antidepressants work better. So there's just a lot of, I don't want people to go out there and interpret that new study and that new information as serotonin has nothing to do with mood. It absolutely does. We have plenty of data to show that when people are deprived of tryptophan, that amino acid molecule that turns into serotonin, when you deprive them of tryptophan, then they have low mood symptoms, especially women. It's more prominent in the studies for women. It will show that.
I have a question.
Yes.
Is serotonin, I've also heard it, some of these sometimes referred to as neuromodulators. Is serotonin kind of responsible for getting, I don't know, all the other ones to kind of like work a little better or be more effective? Does it play a role in the helping the other ones?
Probably. There's a lot that we don't know about how these neurotransmitters function. I will tell you that when people talk about drugs and alcohol, they tend to hyperfixate on dopamine because they believe that dopamine is sort of like the one that is responsible for providing all of the pleasure. And that's not true. Dopamine, when it's triggered, will release. So in that way, it is a neuromodulator. It will release dopamine is the trigger to release things like serotonin, GABA, and the endorphins. Dopamine primarily comes around the back end. and reinforces the addictive nature of something. So dopamine is rising in anticipation of you using a substance. And then when you use the substance, that's when you get the flood of these other neurotransmitters that make you feel really good. And dopamine goes to the memory center of the brain and goes, whatever that was, that flood of neurotransmitters felt really good. We want to remember exactly what this feels like, and we're going to try to repeat it tomorrow. And if you do repeat it tomorrow and the day after and the day after and the day after, that's how addiction develops. If you don't repeat it tomorrow and you put long periods of time in between doing those things, it's a lot less likely that you'll develop addiction, right? Addiction really develops because of the repeated behavior. And dopamine's the driver of that. Dopamine is powerful. It drives you and compulses you towards those things. Does that answer your question?
It's helpful. Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I wish I had a better answer for, they are very intricately involved. I'll say that, the neurotransmitters. And I'll just end off that section of this conversation in terms of why eating protein, getting these amino acids, filling up your pool every day is important. I was looking at a PubMed study, and this is really old. It was from 2002, so I couldn't find any more up-to-date stuff, but 74% of addicts are clinically nutrient deficient. And I suspect a lot of that is protein deficiency. That's a big number. And like I said, I bet you any money we've got much more updated research somewhere. So that leads us to, hopefully at this point you have a better understanding of why you should be eating protein, but it doesn't answer the question of, what are the best forms of protein? Are all those sources created equal? And I really believe that if you're willing to eat protein in some form or fashion, there's a pathway for you. There's a pathway for you to make serotonin, to make dopamine if you're getting enough protein. There's a lot of different ways to do this. In my personal experience, one of the best ways to do this is to eat animal protein in those first couple years of early recovery, because it's the most bioavailable. So when we're talking about animal protein, we're talking about chicken, we're talking about eggs, we're talking about pork, beef, fish, wild game. What I'm not saying is that you have to eat all of these. I know a lot of people don't like pork. A lot of people can't eat pork for either health reasons or religious reasons. That's totally fine. You don't have to eat pork. What I would say, though, is looking at the list of animal-based proteins and trying to pick out the few that you feel drawn to. Which ones do you like? Which ones do you have a preference for? One of the things that never works in like the world of dietetics or nutrition therapy or anything is handing somebody a piece of paper and saying, oh, here you go. You need to go eat all these foods. That doesn't work, because people will usually look at that list and be like, I don't like that stuff. Like, that's so hard, like it's just creating a big barrier for them. So helping people to understand why protein is important, and then saying like, now that protein is important, what do you already like, and it's like, well, I love shredded chicken fajitas or something, you know what I mean? It's like, great, that's a great start, Chicken's got more tryptophan in it than turkey. People think turkey's got all the tryptophan. That's like the one that makes you fall asleep at Thanksgiving, which is a total myth. I've probably said that in another episode, so excuse the redundancy, but that's like a food coma. That's why people are tired on Thanksgiving. It's not the tryptophan in the turkey. But looking for grass-fed meat, looking for things like salmon that are lean proteins. I love ground turkey. I love ground bison. What is regional to you? I've worked with a lot of guys from like Iowa, Nebraska, places where hunting is a really big thing, and it's so easy for them to stock up every winter on wild game. And it's like, do that if that's what you love to do. Those are fantastic sources of proteins. Dairy is a great source of protein too. Again, not everybody can eat dairy. Yes.
I thought you were switching to a whole different area. What about, does fish fall into the animal protein category? Okay. Yeah, so fish is considered an animal, and so all of that works.
Some people really don't want to eat any type of beef or chicken or whatever, but they might be comfortable with eating fish and eggs. I come across that a lot, just because they have a slightly different feeling towards it. And I think that's probably enough. If you're getting a variety of fish and you're eating eggs. But it can't just be that you have like fish and eggs once or twice a month, right? Because remember, we've got to access these amino acids every 3 to 5 hours. So they would need to be significant staples in the diet, in my opinion. Otherwise, you have to really, really be intentional about filling in those gaps with easily accessible, high protein, plant-based foods, if that's the route that you're going. But I just always tell people like, hey, are you willing to eat animal protein? If the answer is yes, great, just eat it, right? Whatever you like. At least in the first couple years. I had somebody who was a dietitian I was doing a group project with some people in a nutrition therapy group, and we were putting together breakfast, and it was this really fun guy. And I was like, what do you like? And he's like, I love egg burritos. And I'm like, cool, put some eggs up there, on the whiteboard. And I'm like, how many eggs you want in there? He's like, I want 3 eggs. And I want a bunch of cheese in there and some salsa and this and that. And I'm like, that's great. Who doesn't love a breakfast burrito, And the dietitian was like, oh, and I think he added bacon to it too. And the dietitian was like, aren't you worried about all this cholesterol? And I was like, no, I'm really not. First of all, this guy's like 22. He is so undernourished. He's getting excited about eating a breakfast burrito that's packed with protein, and he's putting cheese on it because he loves it. Like, this is what people need to do. You are going through a period of renourishing and rebalancing. And if you love those things, just eat those things. It'll all start to balance out. You know what I mean? You might start feeling like, well, I have 2 burritos a week and I don't need to add bacon this time or something, right? Because you'll notice your hunger and satiety hormones start to recalibrate. And that's how you recalibrate your hunger and satiety hormones, by giving your body all of these different proteins. They send these signals to help you get reconnected to what your body really needs. So it tends to pitter off, right? If you're overeating in the beginning, it'll naturally decrease as the weeks and the months go on, and you'll settle in at a more natural rhythm. So yeah.
I remember when I could eat like so much butter and
Really?
so much like a burger a day.
Mm.
And now I want like one a week. I want red meat once a week. Your body starts to tell you, it communicates with you.
Yeah.
It's
There's
really
no
amazing.
shame in eating a burger every day.
No, and they're really no. I mean, I have no shame about that at all. I just don't really. I don't crave red meat as much as I used to anymore. But I still crave it, but just not as much. Like I could just tell my body wanted it wanted a pool. It wanted to fill up a pool of amino acids. I would just my cravings for all of this stuff. And then just like the moment it would hit my tongue, and like, I would just have a response, it was like these are building blocks. These are building blocks. I felt that. So
your body's intelligently designed. It knows exactly what it needs. So when you're super connected to it in that way, it's going to lead you in the right direction,
And I was even a wreck. Like, my systems were still pretty broken back then, but that message came through real strong. Keep eating that stuff.
Yeah. I love that. You got to learn how to get tuned into that stuff. We'll talk about that too more.
Does all dairy count? When you mentioned dairy a moment ago, like you didn't continue on with that.
It's so person specific. That's what I wanted to say. I had somebody write into me once, and they said they heard me talk about drinking milk or something on a podcast, and they drank milk knowing they had a lactose problem just because I said it. And I'm like, don't do that, right? Like, you need to know yourself. Experiment a little. If you already know you don't do well with dairy, there's probably a good reason for that. Could be a lactose issue, could be a casein issue, could be an inflammation issue. Some people do fantastic with dairy, some people don't. It just takes some experimentation. I don't think I mentioned, I totally skipped over this part. Oh no, I have it here. So a lot of times people will be like, oh, I've heard of amino acids. That's the BCAAs, right? That stands for branched chain amino acids. Specifically, we're talking about leucine, isoleucine, and valine. Could be pronounced valine, I don't know. But those 3 amino acids they are a part of the 20 that we talked about, but those are the ones that go into muscle protein synthesis. So we are using different amino acids to grow muscles than we are building our neurotransmitters. Just want to make that distinction. It comes from that same group of 20, but they're different. You know, if you have a protein powder that you're normally drinking right now, you always want to make sure that it has all 9 of the essential amino acids in it, not just the BCAAs. Because you're like, oh, well, I want to get some more protein, I'll start drinking this protein powder. But if it's just the BCAAs, then you might be helping build muscle if you're actively trying to build muscle, but you're not going to be doing much for your neurotransmitters. So look at the back, you know, learn how to read those food labels. Okay, so we talked about animals, but I want to talk about plant-based proteins because there are for sure people listening that are vegans, vegetarians, or maybe they just are more slanted towards a plant-based lifestyle. Like maybe they have a little bit of this and a little bit of that, but they're trying to move in the direction of plant-based. And I will just preface with, I am never going to tell somebody how to eat. I'm never going to shame somebody for how they eat. Your personal preferences for how you eat are your own, and they should always be respected. I do not believe we should ever tell somebody else how to eat, which means I don't ever want somebody to tell me I shouldn't be eating animal protein. I will eat animal protein for the rest of my life because I feel amazing when I do. And the flip side of that is I have personally experimented with vegan and vegetarian diets and I feel horrific. Yeah,
Same.
it's not for everyone. It's not for a lot of people. I've met a lot of people that know they don't feel well not eating animal proteins, but because of the ethical reasons, they're just really trying to maximize the vegetarian and the vegan lifestyle. And again, I respect that. That is your choice. And like I said earlier, there is a pathway. If you want to live a vegan or vegetarian lifestyle, I'm not here to shame anybody or tell anybody they shouldn't do that. But I do want people to understand that if you go that route, vegan or vegetarian, first of all, I really don't recommend somebody like have always being a meat eater. And for some reason they're entering into recovery and they see some blog that says like, you should be a vegetarian in recovery. Just forget about that. If you already like animal protein and you don't mind eating it, just stick with that, because why would you want to add a whole nother restriction into your life of removing meat? That doesn't really make any sense. But of course, there are people that were vegans and vegetarians before they entered into recovery. And of course, they want to continue that lifestyle. It's all acceptable. But I think it's pretty much generally accepted, like being a vegan or a vegetarian doesn't mean you eat muffins all day or pancakes or cereal or just flaxseed and granola, right? Like you have to, if you want to have optimal health, you got to be really careful about making sure you're hitting all those different nutrients, because the truth is it's just harder. You know, if you're eating a diet that includes a healthy mix of meats and vegetables, you don't have to be so careful. But if you completely remove meat, you do need to be careful. You got to make sure you're getting enough protein. You got to make sure you're getting enough of some of these really important B vitamins like B12. You just got to pay a lot closer attention. So some plant-based sources of protein are going to be things like quinoa, peas, chickpeas, otherwise known as garbanzo beans. I love chickpeas. Love putting them on salad and all kinds of stuff. That's what, hummus is made from. It's a big part of making hummus. Nutritional yeast, you can sprinkle that on everything. It's got a little bit of added protein in it. Beans, lentils, even walnuts and almonds. But again, like these, if you take a walnut and you compare it to a 3-ounce beefsteak, the amount of protein is vastly different. You've got to eat a lot more walnuts to get the same amount of protein. I didn't work the numbers, but it's vastly different. If you were willing to eat 3 ounces of beef, you would just get so much good, pure protein with all 9 essential amino acids that it's just easier, right? And you may be out there listening and you're like, oh, the thought of eating a heavy protein like that, it just makes my stomach hurt. Maybe your gut's really messed up right now and it is not digesting protein very well. And I would just say, start working on that first. Have somebody help evaluate you. Do you need a little extra enzymes? Do you need to go get a full spectrum digestive enzyme from the store to help you break protein down for a little while your body's learning how to reproduce all of those enzymes in sufficient amounts? All that kind of stuff. If you are a vegan or a vegetarian and you're like, I want to start eating some more animal products, go slow. You know, I have heard some people say it's a little bit of an on-ramp, depending on how long you've been a vegan or a vegetarian, to get your body used to eating that meat again. So you may need to go slow and just slowly introducing those things. But I want to talk about protein powder just a little bit more. People often ask me like, well, I don't know, it seems like I'm eating enough. I don't know if I could really eat anymore. What do you think about protein shakes? I think they're fine. I don't think they're necessary. I think there's probably very few people that absolutely need them. You can use them if you want them. I just don't find them to communicate with your body the same way as real food does. And what I mean by that is, if I sit down and I eat a 4-ounce piece of chicken, and then the next day I sit down at that same time and I have a protein shake, I just don't personally feel as satiated. I may have gotten the same amount of protein, but I don't feel the same. Not to say that's your experience. Somebody else may have a totally different experience. I love, love, love Designs for Health brand protein powders. I sell this, full disclosure, this is the protein powder I recommend to all my clients. It's made from bone broth protein, so obviously not appropriate for somebody that's vegan or vegetarian. There's a lot of other choices for you there, but I love it because I have never ever had a client drink it and not like it. It tastes really good, or B, have trouble digesting it. So there are a lot of people that have trouble with the whey based proteins, or maybe they have trouble with the pea based ones. But this one, if you're already like a meat eater, it tends to be just so easy on the stomach. People love the way it tastes. They find that it helps them reduce cravings for sweets too, because there's like chocolate and vanilla and all that kind of stuff. Have you tried the Designs for Health protein shakes, Nikki?
No. And I just recently purchased a couple packets of some trial stuff, and I'm not sure if that was one of the brands. And I specifically got it because I think it was made from bone broth. So I'm not sure. I need to double check.
I tried.
I have had good luck with protein powders in the past, and so I've been off of them. And recently I was like, I wonder what's out there these days. So it's funny that you're bringing this up.
They can be tricky. I got one that was made from egg whites and it was extremely expensive. And I was like, oh, this is going to be amazing. And it tasted disgusting. And both me and my son had terrible stomach aches from it, when we actually both can eat eggs pretty easily. So I was like, okay, I don't know that, you got to kind of try a few things, but that's why I love Designs for Health, because I've literally never had somebody not like it and not be able to digest it. It's actually it's made from the beef from animals that are raised in Sweden, without hormones, without antibiotics. It's non-GMO. There's no grains, involved in that sort of thing. Some proteins are more bioavailable than other proteins. Eggs, for instance, are highly bioavailable. What do I mean when I say bioavailable? It means that when you eat it and you digest it and you break it down, your body has access to the majority of those nutrients and amino acids. There are other foods that when we break them down, they're not as bioavailable, and we just do not access those amino acids as well. And a lot of those plant-based proteins are not as bioavailable as animal-based. That's so, again, don't get me wrong. You eat how you want to eat. My biggest suggestion would be to experiment. If you're open to it, like do a couple days where you're doing this, do a couple days where you're doing that. You are the expert of your own life and your own body. You'll notice pretty quickly how things make you feel, and that can help guide your decisions. Some people do really well on like a lot of animal meat, and some people do well with just a little bit. So you got to figure out where you are on that spectrum. And there is a way they use mass spectrometry. That's a way of like measuring the bioavailability of foods. If that's like an interest to you, you can always like Google, what the different foods are, what are the most bioavailable ones, and that sort of thing. So now
I'm sorry, I just want to repeat one thing that you said, because I know that it was a game changer for me.
Mm-hmm.
Like I knew, like I said before, like I knew my body wanted animal protein, a ton of it. But I was having digestive, challenges then. And coming across the right enzyme, or the right supplement, I don't know if betaine is an enzyme or not, the hydrochloric acid or not, but that was a huge game changer for me. It allowed me to eat what I was craving and digest it and feel good. So that was huge. So just want to point that out. Like definitely, if you're having digestive issues, look at that too. If part of you is wanting something, but another part of you is rejecting it, see what needs to be addressed.
For sure. If you're eating protein and you're feeling like it's sitting like a rock in your stomach, it may not be that your body's rejecting that protein. It may just be you don't have enough enzymes. So it does, you're right. It takes a little bit of experimentation and kind of deciphering the signals, right?
Yeah.
That's why working with somebody in early recovery is so important. A practitioner that knows what they're doing and can help walk you through these different things that can come up.
And then you're not trying like 50 different supplements and enzymes and all the things. Like they'll just know which one to tell you to get. And yeah.
I mean, that's what I did, 10 years of self-experimentation. And then I
Same,
was
me
like,
too. That's why we're doing this now. We don't want people to do that.
exactly. I'm like, you don't have to spend the next 10 years trying to figure this out. There's people out there that can help walk you through it and shorten that amount of time exponentially. I have so many clients that I've worked with for somewhere between 6 months, 8 months to a year, and they have complete turnarounds. They're like, I am not anywhere near health-wise, mindset-wise, anything, where they were the year previously. So it does make a big difference. So we've talked about the different types of protein and all that sort of thing. So how much do we really need? Again, there can be a little bit of controversy around this, but I want to remind people that this audience here is mostly probably going to be people in recovery. And so how much protein you need may be different than how much, your neighbor Mike needs. Okay. So 30% of your daily calories is probably good for most people. In recovery, highly recommend this very general recommendation of 20 to 30 grams per meal, 3 meals a day. And that's going to be somewhere falling between 60 and 90 grams for your whole day, right? We tend to say, and these are bare minimums. So if we're talking about the 60 to 90 grams a day, and we're talking about females on the low side, males on the high side, what we're saying is for females, you should really be shooting for at least 60 grams a day, right? Or at least trying to see how that makes you feel. Give it a whirl. If you're a guy, average framed guy, I would say shoot for 90 grams a day. See how you feel. You may experiment with this and be like, wow, when I hit 80 grams, I feel like a rock star. Then that's your number, but if you're like, I don't know. I tried 120 grams and that really made me feel my best. Then that's your number. You really have to kind of experiment, but this is a good guideline. 60 to 90 is a great starting point. I'm not a fan of weighing food or like measuring food. My favorite tool is your hands. So please excuse me if you happen to be listening and you don't have hands, borrow somebody's hands. Okay. If we're looking at protein, look at your own hand, and you can't see me if you're listening, but on YouTube, you can see me. There's a palm, just the palm size, not your fingers, but one palm is 1 serving of protein. Your personal palm, right? Because your palm, Nikki, is going to be totally different from like LeBron James's palm, right? So his palm is bigger because he has a bigger body and he needs to eat more protein. Your palm is smaller. So the size of your palm is going to be smaller because that's how much you need. That's 1 serving. So if you're a woman, you want to get 1 palm at least 3 times a day. If you're a male, shoot for 1 to 2 palms 3 times a day. So if you're a woman, you're looking for somewhere around 3 palms a day. If you're a male, you're looking for maybe somewhere between 3 and 6 palms a day. And this is going to depend on whether you're sedentary or meaning like you're just sitting on the couch, you're not getting any, you have a desk job, you're not getting any activity in, versus somebody that's highly active, working out 5 times a week. So if you want the specific calculation, some people are like, yeah, give me the general recommendation. That's good. Some people are like, I really want to know. Take your weight in pounds and divide it by 2.2. That I will put this in the show notes. That gives you your weight in kilograms. So your weight in pounds divided by 2.2, that's the kilograms. You take that number and do multiply times 0.8. And that will give you a rough number of how many grams you should be shooting for in a day. But that 0.8 is also if you're sedentary. If you're more active, very active, switch out that 0.8 for somewhere between 1.2 and 2. Like 2 being, I'm super active, I'm working out 7 days a week. So weight in pounds divided by 2.2, take that answer, multiply it times 0.8. That's how many grams of protein you should be consuming in a day. If you're sick or stressed, probably need more. If you're really active, probably need more. But that's like a good little, equation. The upper tolerable limit or whatever is like 3.5. I don't recommend that. It's just the studies were saying like, you definitely don't want to go to 3.5, right? Most people will top out at 2. So what does that look like, right? If you're doing 1 palm of chicken, that's probably going to be like 20 to 30 grams of protein. So 1 palm size of chicken on top of your salad, that's 1 meal, right? 4 ounces of ground turkey is going to give you around 22 grams of protein. Oh, I should say that 1 palm of chicken, that 20 to 30 grams, that's about 3 to 4 ounces of chicken. A 6-ounce piece of salmon will give you about 34 grams of protein. About 4 ounces of ground beef, it's going to give you roughly 30 grams of protein, just to kind of give you an idea of what that would look like. You know, I have had some people that are like, oh my gosh, I'm really not consuming enough protein. They're like eating oatmeal for breakfast and then having like, I don't know, some kind of bread thing for lunch and then pasta for dinner. And they're like, oh my gosh, I'm really not eating enough protein. They might be like super intimidated by those numbers that I just gave you. And what I would say is like, nobody just goes from like very little protein to tons of protein every day. You just do it in baby steps. So if you evaluate your own life and you're like, I'm only getting about 2 palms of protein a day, you just up it by 1 palm. If you're like, oh, I'm only getting like 1 palm a day, up it by 1 palm. You just kind of like move in that direction, right? You don't go from 1 palm to 6 palms. You go palm by palm by palm. Give yourself a little on ramp to making those changes and make it easier on yourself. Those baby steps will really help get you to a place where you can learn the language of your own body and figure out how much protein you need to feel really good, satiated, settled, calm, relaxed, all of those things that we're looking for.
Kelly?
Yes.
I would love for you quickly just to speak to beans. I remember one time on, I don't know, either an interview or we were talking just personally, but you made the analogy, or you just started talking about how, and you mentioned this earlier, the amount of walnuts you would need to match, a 3-ounce piece of meat. But you were talking about beans and it really like hit home, and you're like, the amount of tryptophan, to get the amount of tryptophan from beans that you would from a piece of, this much meat, the amount of fiber and just mass of beans would be so much. And that was a very helpful thing for me to try and comprehend, like, okay, well, beans are protein. Why can't I just eat a palm worth of beans? Like, can you just speak to that real quick?
Yeah, and I'm just Googling how much protein in a cup of beans. So there's 2 things to note. If we're looking at beans are, packaged in with these other things. I'm not a monotasker, so I might have to come back to that. But yeah, if you look at like a piece of steak, it's pure protein, right? But you look at beans, it's packaged in a different way. There's a lot of fiber that's going to be in there, a lot of carbohydrates. These are not necessarily bad things. These are good things. But the problem is that because there's so many other things in there, it crowds out the amount of protein that can be in that food. So
that was the crowding out. That was a helpful term to learn.
Yeah. So I'm such a monotasker and I'm not good at Googling and talking at the same thing. But I would imagine if you Googled 1 cup of cooked beans, there might be a decent amount of protein in there, but you have to remember all the other things that are in there too, that could be preventing you from kind of really hitting that satiation point. Does
it sound right? 15 grams of protein in a cup of cooked beans?
Totally. That sounds about right. And if you're the kind of person, which this kind of segues nicely into our next conversation, if you're the kind of person that eats like 6 meals a day, it would probably be just fine for you to have like a couple of those meals, lentil based, bean based, no animal products, right? Because you're getting little bits, all day long. But the other thing I was going to bring up is that the thing I hear from people a lot is they'll say, I'm a grazer. They love to say that word, grazer. I like to graze. And it started to drive me a little bit bonkers because I would just hear people say it all the time. And I was like, I need to look more into this, grazing philosophy or whatever. And what I found is that there's really two distinct things about it. One is I actually found some studies that are starting to categorize grazing behavior almost as an eating disorder. And let me tell you what I mean by that. Grazing, quote unquote, grazing is really more of like unstructured, repetitive eating, where you're just kind of like responding to cues around you. Like you walk into the kitchen, you're looking in the cabinets and you're like, I have a little handful of this, a little handful of that. It's not that that's bad. It's just that you may be not connected to your true hunger and satiety signals when you're doing that. You may find that you feel better eating little things throughout the day, but just walking around in and out of your kitchen and going from here and there and grazing all day long is not the same as eating 5 to 7 small meals a day. If you're eating 5 to 7 small plate meals a day, that is an actual way of eating. That is not the same as grazing, because if you're eating 5 to 7 meals, you're putting some thought into those meals. You might even have set times of the day where you're doing that. Grazing is a lot more reactionary. It's more of like a habitual behavior. It's performed in automatic response to a stimuli. It's totally different. And there are some philosophies, theories, or whatever, kind of exploring this idea as it being more of disordered eating or eating disorder than actually being okay. So when somebody tells me they're more of a grazer, I kind of like to gauge some extra questions with them, because there is genetic evidence to show that some people do really well with 3 larger meals a day, and there are other people who do really well with 5 to 7 smaller meals a day. So there's a genetic component to that. Either one of those is fine, but it's not grazing. That's different. And then this is the last thing we're going to talk about is, how can I track it if I want to track it? Like, how do I even figure out where I'm at other than just kind of thinking about what I ate yesterday? There's an app that I use with all my clients. It's called Cronometer. I'll put it in the show notes. That is Cronometer. It's free. There's a paid version, but you only need the free version. And you can just start popping in there what you're eating. This is not for you to obsess about calories. Calories are okay. They have some importance, but with the conversations that we have, we really don't focus on calories very much. Those are just kind of a baseline measure of a few different things. But you can start popping in there very easily from your phone 3 days of tracking, and you'll be able to see how much protein you're getting. Do the calculation, compare it to my general recommendations of 60 grams, minimum for females and 90 for guys. Just see where you're at. Are you way off mark? Are you way under eating? Are you way overeating? How do you even feel about it? So Cronometer will show everything. Like, it'll show how much magnesium you're getting, how much selenium you're getting, all the micronutrients, vitamins, minerals. It's a wonderful, wonderful tool for you to analyze your own diet. When I'm working with somebody, I help show them how to use the tool, and we analyze the diet together by looking at specific things. But you could you could be an amateur and totally glean a lot of great information from that. You can also go to my website and download the Pause Protocol infographic, which is a 1-page sheet you can put up on your refrigerator. And it's got all the wonderful foods on there that have been handpicked by me as part of the Pause Protocol, because they have a wonderful amino acid profile. They have a wonderful antioxidant profile. They have a wonderful fiber or healthy fat profile. There's foods that exist in this world that are wonderful and not on that list. That doesn't mean you can't eat them. It just means I couldn't fit them on there, right? But I put a ton of great foods to choose from. So you can use that as like a little bit of a springboard to, hey, where are my healthy proteins coming from? What should I put on the grocery list this week? And you know what? I'm also going to add my food mood journal to the website, so you can download that too. It's just a 1-pager. There's a lot of tools out there to help you track your food and your mood. But this one little pager kind of shows you, like, you put your food in here, what time you ate it, how you felt, it can just give you an idea of what the patterns are. What did I have for lunch? And why do I feel like crap at 2:00 every day? Maybe you're eating way too many processed carbs at lunch and it's putting you to sleep and you don't have enough protein. But really at the end of the day, it's all about using these general guidelines to help guide you to the right amount of protein for you. Like, you might feel terrible when you eat bacon and wonderful when you eat ground beef. You might feel terrible when you eat eggs, but wonderful when you eat lentils. These are things you have to figure out for yourself. How does food make me feel? What is the right amount for me? And what helps me to reach my goals of having really well-produced neurotransmitters. Every morning when I wake up, I'm walking around with those little cups. They're full. They're full at 8 a.m., they're full at 2 p.m., and they're full at 8 p.m., right? Pulling that from the amino acid pool. I forgot to mention this. I'm not a doctor. I am not telling you what to do. This podcast is purely educational. There are some people that really need to be careful with their protein intake. Those people likely know who they are because their doctor has told them you need to be on a protein restricted diet. Maybe you have a kidney disorder. Maybe you are a post-organ transplant patient. Maybe you have something going on with your liver. If your doctor's told you to be careful, don't say, well, Kelly from the Addiction Nutritionist told me to eat more protein. Follow your doctor's orders, but just use common sense. That's kind of it.
Kelly,
So
in regard to that, can I ask you, if somebody does have a kidney disorder or something like that, what do you recommend in those cases in order for them to get all of their aminos?
It's really tough because if the doctor literally says you have to be on a protein restricted diet, I'm not even sure in those circumstances that using amino acid supplements is safe. That's something that
factor.
Because what?
Because it's a supplement and breaking down the supplement, or because of the actual amino acids in the supplement?
Because of the amino acids. Like if amino acids are what protein is. And so if your body and your kidneys cannot handle a certain amount of protein and amino acids, then you may not be able to circumvent that. I don't know. If in those situations, I try to work really closely with the person's medical team or, dietitian that they've been assigned from the hospital or that sort of thing. I had a client once who was on the liver transplant list, and we worked closely with her team to make sure that she was, they kind of told her, hey, you should get 80 grams of protein a day, but didn't really tell her anything about where she should be getting those grams from. So we worked together to optimize that protocol for her, and she ended up being taken off of the transplant list. She no longer needs a liver transplant. So I'm not claiming that as like something that I did, but stories that you hear all the time where people are given really terrible outcomes, outlooks, diagnoses don't always turn out to be what you think. The summary really is quality proteins, optimize digestion so you can make sure that you're digesting proteins well. Go check out the digestion episode for more information about that. Bioavailability matters. Eat breakfast if you can. Really try to shoot for those 3 meals a day. I'm not a fan of fasting for people in early recovery. I'm really not, because you're missing opportunities to renourish your body. Maybe later, after you enter out of early recovery, it might not be such a bad idea, but you really got to shore up the foundation first and make sure all those protein deficiencies, or nutrient deficiencies in general, are taken care of. Do the food journal, use tools like Chronometer. These are all wonderful tools that you can use to help you figure out what the right amount of protein is for you. And the last thing I'll say is that I batch cook 3 proteins a week. Protein is such an important, it's top of mind for me every day. And so I batch cook 3 different proteins a week. So one week I might do like ground turkey, ground bison, and shredded chicken. And I just use those in different ways to put on salads, to turn into chili, to put inside tacos. But I always like to have it in the fridge. So that's one of the ways that you can get on top of or get in front of always having protein on you.
Yep. I always have something ready to go, whether it's cooked or defrosting or whatever, in the fridge for the next day.
Yeah. That is the deep dive on protein.
Man, so important. That's so much important, valuable information for people. Nice job.
It was a lot of information. Do you feel like I missed anything? Is there anything we could talk about more? Or?
I don't think so. I think I, jumped in wherever there was something that I felt was not completely covered. So I think you did just such an amazing job. And I hope people really hear this and reach out to you to work with, to, do this stuff, and really assess where they're at and get some help, because this stuff for me was really overwhelming. Like once you start throwing in some numbers and amounts and all that, like I just kind of, it makes me kind of ill to even, I just hate it. I hate that. So having somebody else help figure that out is really, really helpful. I do want to actually just say one thing, because I remember when I was in an early recovery, and it kind of goes back to the stuff I said before. I was not digesting stuff well. And I was, working with somebody like you, functional medicine, learning all these new terms and things was a lot. And I wasn't quite, plus our brains are not really working that great in early recovery, honestly. So to like comprehend a ton of really complex information, not the easiest task, right? So you got that in addition to your body not really working great, all the things. But I will say the information was knowledge. Like when I could get in little tidbits, bite-sized bits of what made sense about what my professional person that I was working was recommending, it helped it work. It probably could be some of the placebo effect, but also just made sense. And it just helped me navigate better. So like, knowing why you're taking this or that really just it just helps, and it helps you become more informed and navigate the stuff better. Cause, so I just think I just want to say that, like if it's all a lot at once, review in bite-sized bits and do whatever you need to do to grasp it so that it can make sense, because I think that really helps. It helped me.
Yeah, I would agree. Usually when I finish like a webinar or whatever, I always tell people, if you can't remember anything I said, just remember this: protein, protein, protein. That's all you need to remember. And I will often leave groups after presenting this information and hearing them be like, I have never heard this information in my life. Like they'll be like, I know I'm supposed to eat protein, but I had no idea it was so closely connected to recovery or mental health. So that's why I think it's important that people really understand the concept, because then you internalize it and go, oh, that's why I need to do it. That's why I should focus on it, because it's going to make me feel better. I got one other thing to share, actually, if you don't mind. Mm-hmm. So I think this, I don't know if the listeners may or may not, but I've also studied what's called Ayurveda. It's like the Indian science of nutrition and herbs and lifestyle. And this is a culture that, really leans heavily towards vegetarianism, but within Ayurveda, when somebody is ill and recovering, meat is a medicinal prescription, despite their religious ideas. And it's actually prescribed, as part of like the thing. It is brought into the system for a period of time. It's really interesting. And it's kind of prefaced like, this is not a forever thing. This is like medicinal. Like we are. So there you go. I didn't know that.
Yeah. Really,
that's
really
fascinating.
Interesting.
Thank you for sharing. If you want more help with walking through the changes of the PAWS protocol or increasing your protein, join Recovery U and we will help you do that. So I thank you for listening today. I hope you got a lot of value out of this. Consider sharing this episode with a friend, sharing it on your social media. Let your friends in recovery know protein, protein, protein. So I hope you have a wonderful day, and we will see you next time. Bye, Nikki.
Bye. Bye.